Tonight, Kristen and I arrived at my best friend Terry Russell's place to celebrate the new year. The number of cars suggested a big party, but I was still surprised by the crowd inside. Terry hugged Kristen and kissed her cheek, then shook my hand and let us in. Throughout the evening, Kristen and I let loose with dancing, eating, and drinking more than we perhaps should have. Luckily, we didn't need to think about how to get home since there was a bed waiting for us upstairs. We were among the few guests who had the option to stay the night. In my career as an investment broker, I've managed to become one of the leading brokers at my firm and am ranked in the top quarter company-wide, so I recognized many faces at the party. Terry had warned me that some of the attendees were a bit shady, and sure enough, Kristen, much like Terry's wife Clarissa, found herself fending off unwelcome attention. As the night unfolded, I took the opportunity to mingle, catching up with existing clients and engaging with some of the more affluent guests in hopes of expanding my client base. I also kept a close watch on Kristen. Even though I fully trusted her, I couldn't help feeling a bit jealous. I kept an eye on her and occasionally stepped in to rescue her from any guy who seemed to be pushing his luck. Every time I did this at previous parties, Kristen would give me a smile and a gentle kiss, often with a quiet thank you or thanks for rescuing me, honey. Tonight was no different. I frequently approached, when I saw her trying to get away from a guy, took her hand and led her to another part of the room. She would give me a soft touch, a smile, and a hug or kiss on the cheek, then thank me quietly. We'd chat briefly, share a quick dance or drink, and then go back to mingling. As the night went on and more guests left, only those staying to celebrate the new year with Terry remained. I noticed one man who seemed to be following Kristen around, almost like he was stalking her. He was always close by and kept a constant watch on her. I could tell he was infatuated with her, totally fixated and trying every chance he could to hit on her. At first, Kristen would ignore him or move away, but as the evening progressed, she stayed around him longer, even smiling and laughing at his jokes. Sometimes she would lightly touch his forearm. This wasn't like Kristen. She never flirted so openly with any man, especially not a stranger. Terry noticed me watching Kristen and Jonathan just before midnight and came over. He said, "That guy with Kristen is Jonathan Douglas. He's a real jerk and a notorious ladies' man." I didn't even invite him. One of the women I invited brought him along. I hadn't seen them together before you and Kristen arrived. Terry stood next to me and scanned the room carefully. He had a thoughtful look on his face and continued, "Actually, I think Jonathan's date might have left. I saw her watching him follow Kristen around earlier, and then they had a heated conversation. I haven't seen her since. He's trouble, Stan. Big-time trouble. He's married, but mostly separated. He preys on married women and single women with money. It's strange because he's already worth millions. You need to keep an eye on him. He's so smooth he could convince anyone to do anything and make them think it was their idea." For the third time that night, I went over to break up Kristen and Jonathan. He gave me a nasty look like he had before, and made a snide comment as I led Kristen away. This time, Kristen didn't thank me. Instead, she looked upset and said, "Stan, what's your problem tonight?" I was really enjoying talking to Jonathan. "Why did you pull me away? He's different from the other guys you've had to save me from. He's really interesting and has some great stories. He's running for mayor and was asking me about how to get his message out better. He might even offer me a job. I need to network more with him. Think about the opportunities if I could get a role in his administration." "I don't care, Kristen. I don't trust that guy and I don't want him around you. Terry says he's a real womanizer and I've heard bad things about him. I want you to be safe. From what I've heard, any job he might offer you could involve more than just work." Kristen shot me an angry look for a moment. I was worried I had messed up, but then she smiled. Leaning in to kiss my cheek, she said, "Oh, that's sweet. I think you're a bit jealous. Don't worry, though. You're all mine." I was already swept up in the crowd of people before I realized she said, "I'm all yours, not you're all mine." When it hit me, I stopped and wondered if it was just a slip of the tongue or if she was hinting at something deeper. 3 months later, I had reason to think back on that night with pain. The past 2 months had been tough at home. Shortly after the party, Kristen started coming home late from her meetings or visits to her parents. When I asked her about it, she would get angry and defensive, saying she lost track of time or had to finish up work before she could leave. She also started volunteering for the local Republican Party, which took up more of her time. Kristen, who was a top manager in her section, became a well-known volunteer office manager for the campaign headquarters, giving advice on public information. From what I heard, she handled everything well and became a popular volunteer. Like many unsuspecting husbands, I noticed our bed life declining as she spent more time away from home. I was turned down more often, and when we did have our time together, it wasn't as enjoyable. Where we used to make love for hours, now she just let me have closeness with her. She always had excuses, like being tired or it being too late. But the fact was, she used to be a willing and passionate partner. Now, it felt like a chore if we had it at all. One day I was talking to Terry about the issues in my marriage. He looked concerned and said, "Stan, I'm getting worried. I might be the reason your marriage is falling apart. I've heard that Jonathan has found another married woman to mess around with. Rumor has it, he met her at the New Year's party, and we both know where he was and who he spent most of the evening with. She's supposedly also a volunteer for his mayoral campaign." I suddenly felt dizzy and out of breath. Terry noticed and asked, "Stan, what's wrong? You look pale all of a sudden." I stared at Terry for a moment, then said, "Kristen has started volunteering at the Republican Party office after work and on Saturdays. She's always late coming home and won't talk about what she's doing. Whenever I bring it up, she gets defensive and angry. On the nights she's the latest, she even gets mad if I try to get close to her or if I want to be intimate." Terry leaned back in his chair, pressed his lips together for a moment, and then said, "Stan, I'm going to find out what's going on. If Jonathan has been taking advantage of my hospitality by having an affair with your wife, I'll make him pay. I'd be upset if he were after any married woman at my party, but doing that to your wife is even worse. I should have made him leave when his date did, but I was too focused on being a good host. If I'm responsible for your problems, I promise to do whatever I can to fix it. I should add a bit more about Terry here. He's my best friend, and I trust him completely. I would even trust him in a room with my naked wife if they had both been celibate for a year. He would never harm me. We are closer than brothers. Terry is incredibly smart, probably the smartest person I've ever known. We were in the same high school class. He was the valedictorian, while I just managed to graduate in the top 10% of our class of 223. He went to college for a year but dropped out, saying it was a waste of time. He never studied much and missed almost all his classes, but still got a perfect 4.0 GPA. Eventually, he took a few finance courses and then taught himself everything he needed to know about investing and finance. When Terry was in his first year of college, he inherited over $70,000 from his grandparents. Unlike many young people, he didn't waste the money. He bought a better used truck but invested the rest in the stock market. His initial investments were based on a broker's advice, but those stocks were just trendy picks that didn't benefit him. Only the broker and the brokerage firm made money. This really upset Terry, so he decided to learn about investing himself. He started watching CNBC, reading books, and researching. He opened an account with a discount online brokerage and moved all his money into it to invest on his own. From his very first trade, Terry began making more money than he had with the so-called experts. It helped that he started investing during the late 1980s, tech boom and dot-com craze. He bought and sold many high-flying stocks. While not all his investments were profitable, he managed to grow his wealth significantly. He smartly exited the market before it crashed and shifted his investments into safer, more stable stocks. He bought shares of Berkshire Hathaway for just over $17,000 each and sold them 3 years later for $72,357 each. By then, Terry was a multimillionaire and was involved in various ventures, including real estate. After finishing college, I worked as a salesman for a restaurant supply company for 4 years. Disliking the travel and becoming serious about Kristen, I switched careers to become a stockbroker. Terry entrusted me with managing a portion of his investments when I started in the business. I suspected he did it to help me out and felt guilty about it, thinking it was charity. Terry convinced me that I was needed for 2 reasons. First, he wanted some of his investments spread across different brokerages for safety. Second, he believed I might hear of good or bad information about his investments before he did. We never considered anything illegal like insider trading, but occasionally I did have valuable insights to share with him. We both benefited from this arrangement. Terry referred many of his friends to me for full-service brokerage, and I earned money from trading for them. Terry didn't work outside his home. He worked 8 to 10 hours a day, putting in a lot of effort, but only for himself. He researched stocks, made trades, and lived a high-profile lifestyle. He tried to include Kristen and me in his social circle, taking us to many charity events at his expense. Sometimes I paid for events myself since I also had an expense account as a broker. We attended political meetings with Terry and mingled with important people in our area. We were at every party Terry hosted at his house. The Friday night after Terry and I talked, we were supposed to go to a $500 per plate political rally with Terry and his date. Again, he was covering the cost for Kristen and me. This time, Kristen was even more reluctant to go than usual. I insisted she come with me, and I regret it to this day. Our marriage was already headed for trouble, but I might have stayed unaware a bit longer if Terry's investigators hadn't reported on Kristen's activities. That event marked the beginning of the end for us. When we arrived, I saw it was an event where an incumbent state Senate candidate was speaking to support other candidates. The ticket money went to the state Republican Party and some to local politicians. What I didn't realize was that the mayoral candidate was the guest of honor, none other than Jonathan Douglas. As we entered, I saw Jonathan near the front talking with several important guests. Kristen seemed to pull back slightly, so I turned to see what was wrong. She was staring at Jonathan with a look of admiration. I had a sinking feeling that I had lost her. I asked, "What's wrong?" Kristen quickly composed herself and gave me a faint smile. "I'm sorry, honey. I didn't realize who this event was for." She looked so guilty that I doubted her explanation, but I kept quiet. She should have known Jonathan would be there, considering she worked part-time at the campaign headquarters. I thought to myself, now I understand why she was so hesitant about coming. I saw Terry observing our conversation. He then gave Jonathan a hard look before forcing a smile and putting his hand on the small of Kristen's back. He helped her to her chair and pulled it out for her. After seating Kristen, he placed Clarissa in a chair to his left. As I walked past, Terry said, "Sorry, Stan. I didn't know Jonathan was going to be here when I invited you." I noticed Kristen's reaction. "I hope I'm wrong, but I have a meeting on Monday with someone I want you to meet. Can we have lunch around 11:30? After finishing her meal, Kristen went to the restroom. I noticed that, when she left, Jonathan also got up and left the room through a different door. I thought about following them and started to get up, but Terry stopped me by placing his hand on my arm. He said, "No, Stan, it's already handled. If it's what you think, it's too late now. Just wait until Monday. Please?" Later, I lost track of Kristen again and went looking for her after returning from the restroom. I ended up on the stage behind the curtains and heard moaning and soft voices, one of which was definitely Kristen's. Anger surged through me as I walked toward the sounds, but I tripped over a rope and made a noise. Kristen's voice whispered, "Someone's coming. I have to leave, honey. It wouldn't be good for us to get caught. See you at the office. I love you." I heard a quick kiss and then footsteps hurrying away. I chased after them but was too late to catch what I assumed was Kristen and Jonathan. As I was heading back, I ran into Terry in the hallway. His expression was stormy. He grabbed me and said, "Damn it, Stan. I told you to let it go. My team needs to gather information before you do anything rash. If she's really cheating, and I believe she is, we need proof to plan and get the best outcome for you, whether it's revenge or a divorce. If you keep going like this, you'll just end up getting messed over by the legal system." After Terry helped calm me down, he said, "I saw them rushing down the other hallway. They stopped at the door to the auditorium, and Kristen looked around for you. When she didn't spot you, she got worried and told Jonathan she thought you were the one searching for them. Now you have a suspicious partner who's harder to catch in the act." When we got back to the table, we made a big show of things. We made sure Kristen and some others saw us laughing and passing around a flask. Kristen gave me a stern look when I sat down next to her and asked where we had been. At that moment, Clarissa came up to Terry, hugged him, and said, "All right, you two. If I catch you sneaking off for drinks again, I either get to join you or I'll report you. Now let me have a swig from that flask." Kristen seemed to relax a bit and then asked Clarissa, "Oh my God, is that what you two have been up to? I wondered where you went when I couldn't find you." Clarissa laughed and said, "Yeah, I tried to catch up with them for a drink before they got inside, but as you can see, they outran me." Later, while dancing, I took a turn with Clarissa. She pressed close to me, and when I tried to look around the room, she wouldn't follow. She kissed me gently on the cheek and said, "No, Stan, you don't want to look over there. Just dance with me and enjoy the night. I know what you're going through, and it's going to get worse. Just remember, Terry and I are here for you and always will be." I relaxed a bit and kissed her back. "Thanks for handling the conversation earlier. I almost lost it, and Terry thinks that would have been really bad. I want to confront Jonathan so badly, but I don't know how. The rest of the week and weekend were tough. I felt scared and angry. I knew deep down that Kristen had emotionally left me and that it was only a matter of time before she left physically. We hadn't been a happy couple for weeks, and I was starting to distance myself from her, even though I wasn't sure if she was cheating. If she wasn't cheating, then we had another problem because we weren't as loving as we used to be. Finally, the day came for my meeting with Terry and his friend. I was almost certain his friend would be a private investigator. I was a bundle of nerves, feeling my stomach churning and sour from stress. I could sense my anger bubbling beneath the surface, and I knew the other two men could probably see it. I was both scared of what I might discover and eager to find out. When I arrived at the table, Terry stood up, shook my hand, and then gave me a hug. After greeting me, he introduced me to his friend Simon Hobbs, who indeed turned out to be a private investigator. We looked over the menu for a moment to decide what to order. The waitress came over, took our orders, and then Terry said, "Let's handle the tough stuff first." He glanced at Simon and then back at me. Simon reached into his briefcase, pulled out a large envelope, and handed it to me. He said, "We followed your wife and Mr. Douglas as Mr. Russell asked. The surveillance lasted 20 days from when we were hired until last Saturday night. During this time, we found that they had lunch together every day except Sundays, when she stayed home. They ate at various nice hotels around town and then went to a room rented by Mr. Douglas's campaign. We managed to get into the room 8 times pretending to be room service. Each time, neither of them was dressed and the bed had been used. We have photos of the room and the people in the report. We also recorded audio of each visit by placing a microphone under the door. They had closeness every time we observed them at the hotels. Additionally, we have evidence of inappropriate contact at the campaign headquarters and afterward. We even have photos of them having closeness 3 times at the campaign headquarters and once at a party in a local dance bar with Mr. Douglas's friends and supporters. One of the most incriminating things we recorded was when Mr. Douglas used your wife to get the support of the Municipal Workers Union. They met with the union president, Stephen Negrano, at the Gentlemen's Club. He seemed very interested in your wife. We have photos of her sitting on his lap while he was touching her. My investigator was close enough to record their conversation. Listen to this part of the tape and then we'll move on. Simon set up a small laptop on the table and started playing a clip from a DVD. He said, "You'll get a copy of this DVD with your report, but I wanted to talk about this particular incident before we end our meeting. My investigator was very excited about this information, and I think your lawyer will be too." Terry and I leaned in to watch and listen. In the video, Kristen was sitting between Jonathan and Stephen. Both men were leaning in to talk to her, and Jonathan's hands were all over her. His hand was under the skirt for a while. We heard Kristen tell him to stop once, but he responded, "Come on, Kristen. I can tell you're turned on, and you know you enjoy this. Just go with it. This kind of thing happens here sometimes." After he stopped talking, Jonathan gave Kristen a gentle kiss. She moaned, and his hand continued moving under her skirt, which was one of the shortest I had ever seen her wear, and definitely one I had never seen before. From the angle of the video, it was clear she wasn't wearing any underwear. When Jonathan leaned back, Stephen reached out and pulled Kristen onto his lap. She tried to resist, but he kept pulling until she was sitting on him. He unbuttoned her top and began doing that. Kristen told him to stop, saying, "Stop that, Stephen." Stephen then said to Jonathan, "Jonathan, you know what needs to be done to get the union's endorsement. I want a weekend with this lady. If you arrange that, I'll make sure the union supports your campaign." Kristen tensed up and tried to get up, saying, "No, that's never going to happen. Let me go." Stephen just looked at Jonathan and raised his eyebrows while still holding Kristen on his lap and continuing to touch her. Jonathan swallowed hard, leaned into Kristen and said, "Honey, we really need this endorsement. Please, just go with him and help me out. This will secure our future, and it's not like you've never had closeness before. Just tell your husband you have a weekend meeting." Kristen looked shocked and hesitated for a moment, but then she relaxed. She spread her legs wider to make it easier for Stephen. She moaned, turned her head towards him, and they kissed. She reached the peak while sitting on his lap, screaming and collapsing against him with her legs spread open. By then, many men in the club were more focused on Kristen than on the dancers. Around this time, the club manager came over to the table. He looked at Kristen, then at the men next to her. He seemed nervous and said, "Mr. Negrano, I've overlooked a lot for you, but I've been warned that things have gotten too obvious. Lieutenant Jones told me the chief has asked some detectives to come to the club and crack down on this kind of behavior. If they catch us allowing this, they'll shut us down. Can you please take it to a back room or the hotel? This is my only source of income." Stephen laughed and looked at a big man on the other side of the table. He said, "Hey, Ralph, give Joe here a couple grand for his trouble. My lady and I are heading to the DoubleTree for the weekend. Could you make the arrangements for us? Set it up as an executive meeting for the union like usual." I felt my anger rising and started to get up. I growled, "That lying witch. She was away last weekend. She called me Friday night and said she had an emergency project for her job and was flying to San Francisco." Terry and Simon grabbed me and forced me back into my seat. Simon said, "Please wait. I want to show you another clip before you read the report. We have some ideas about this we want to discuss with you, but I thought you should see the DVD first." My operative stopped filming at the club and called for backup. My team got to the DoubleTree before Stanley did. After Stanley checked in, he and Kristen went to the bar for drinks. My operatives followed them in hotel uniforms. When they opened the door, my team went in with them. After Stanley's guys checked out the suite, my men tidied up the room. Simon smiled and continued. The senior man even sent his assistant to get fresh flowers and more champagne so they had a reason to linger. We set up several cameras and microphones in the main room and both bedrooms. By the time your wife and Stanley returned to the suite, they were both drunk. The cameras captured these scenes, among others. Simon started playing the DVD on his laptop. Kristen and Stanley walked into the suite and shut the door. She was laughing and rubbing him. Stanley bent down, kissed her, and then violently ripped open her blouse, sending buttons flying. He pushed the blouse down off her shoulders as Kristen pulled down her skirt. Once her skirt was on the floor, she let her blouse fall beside it. From earlier pictures at the club, I knew she wasn't wearing any underwear, so she was practically naked. She kicked off her shoes, took Stephen's hand, and giggled as she led him toward the largest bedroom and the king-sized bed. After several minutes, we saw another male figure walk into the picture. It was the director of the city. We heard him say, "Easy, honey, you just relax and enjoy another nice Johnson. Jonathan and you agreed that I got a weekend with you for an endorsement. Now me and the boys are going to enjoy it. If you just relax, you'll never want to go back to that little limp Johnson of Jonathan's." After Simon turned off his computer, he looked at me and said, "Your wife stayed in that hotel room until checkout time on Monday. During that time, she was intimate with all the senior managers of the Municipal Workers Union and with Stephen. We overheard plans to use union money and paid union workers to support Jonathan's mayoral campaign. Late on Saturday night, Jonathan, the director, and Stephen all had closeness with Kristen. We have photos and recordings of them planning to misuse city funds if Jonathan is elected. We also have pictures of Senator Nussbaum and two judges being intimate with your wife and Jonathan Douglas. The recordings show Jonathan was exchanging her favors for their endorsements." The investigator paused before continuing. He said, "When you tried to catch your wife and Mr. Douglas at the campaign dinner, they were about to have closeness on stage. He had her dress pulled down. They were just starting when she heard you and made him stop. That's why they ran. We have pictures of what happened there as well. It would have been more damaging if you hadn't intervened. Pictures of that act with the crowd in the background would have been very damaging. At least, you didn't cause a scene that would have hurt your case further. We've given you a copy of the entire file and can provide one to your attorney if you want. Our investigation fees cover any local court testimony if needed. However, I suggest we continue surveillance for possible criminal charges. While it's usually up to the police, if we give the police and the FBI evidence of campaign fund misuse and conspiracy, they'll take it more seriously. Plus, if you pursue a divorce and your wife ends up in jail, you'll likely get a better settlement." Even though I knew this was coming, I was still deeply shaken and surprised. I couldn't believe how low and disrespectful my wife had acted during the surveillance period. The documents revealed she believed she was in love with Jonathan, and they were discussing how and when she would leave me. She was excited about a promised position in Jonathan's administration if he became mayor. What shocked me even more was her willingness to spend the weekend at the DoubleTree and perform some acts for Jonathan and his friends. Some of the things Kristen did with Jonathan were things she had always refused to do with me. Often, she was the one initiating these acts later in the weekend. I had always known Kristen was ambitious and admired powerful people, but I couldn't believe the extent of her willingness to advance her career. It made me feel physically sick. I barely ate my meal, and I noticed Terry didn't eat much either. After the investigator left, we had several drinks. We sat quietly, lost in our own thoughts, until Terry said, "Stan, I'm really sorry for ruining your marriage. I take full responsibility for what happened, and I want to make it right. I know I can't undo what's happened, but I'll do everything I can to help you. I'll find you a great lawyer for the divorce and support you in any way you need until you're as okay as possible." I pushed back from the table and looked at Terry. I said, "Well, start looking for that attorney." I was almost ready to give Kristen an ultimatum to either change her attitude or we'd divorce before I was sure about her cheating. Now there's no way I'm staying with her. I can't believe she did those things. I wonder when she changed or if I just never knew who she really was. As for blaming you, you know as well as I do that Kristen's cheating isn't your fault, and you don't owe me anything for that. On Thursday, Terry called me and said, "Hey, I've found you a top-notch lawyer. She really dislikes cheaters and always fights for the innocent party in a divorce. She also has a strong dislike for public figures and businessmen who use their power to take advantage of women. If you handle this right, you can not only divorce Kristen and keep most of your assets, but also get revenge on Jonathan." Terry gave me the name and phone number of the lawyer he recommended. I called her office later that day to set up a consultation. When I mentioned my name, her assistant said they were expecting my call and had scheduled an appointment for the next morning at 9 a.m. I agreed to the appointment and got a list of what I needed to bring and the information I should prepare for the meeting. When I showed up the next morning, they took me straight into the office. I was impressed with my new lawyer, Sally, and we quickly started discussing what I wanted for the divorce. I told her, "I want to end this marriage and keep all the assets. I know I might not get everything I want, but that's my goal. I want to sue that guy for everything we can and make sure he loses the mayoral election and ends up broke." Sally smiled and leaned back in her chair, rocking it slightly as she thought. After a moment, she asked, "Do you really want to do that, or do you want to financially destroy him, ruin his chances in the election, tarnish his reputation, and possibly get him imprisoned? We could likely get him some jail time if we handle this correctly. I've looked at parts of the investigator's report, and it's very strong. I know it's painful to hear, but the information is so damaging that we could bring down many of the key people involved. I have to turn the report over to the authorities since it shows violations of federal laws. If you let me do that first and then file for divorce, we can hit him with a harder punishment. If you file first, he might run and avoid getting caught for a while. I don't care what happens to him and the others who slept with Kristen, as long as it causes them a lot of pain. I know Kristen is completely at fault, but she couldn't have done it without him being willing. From what I saw, he was the one who chased after her until she gave in. It takes two to be involved. She always wore her rings, so he knew she was married. In fact, I heard them on the tapes talking about me and planning how to handle me when the time came for the big split. Sally and I went through her questions, and I made my choices. I told her to prepare and file the divorce papers right away. We also agreed that the PI report should be given to the FBI immediately so they could start investigating the campaign finance violations and misuse of union and city funds. Sally suggested that I accompany the process server when Kristen is served and make a threat about suing Mr. Douglas. She explained, "Most politicians and powerful people will either physically threaten you, try to get you fired, or threaten to sue you back. If you stand firm, he might try to settle things privately by offering you money. If that happens, depending on where he gets the money, we could potentially catch him in more campaign finance violations. Many people in public office are shady, so he might try to use campaign funds to bribe you." Sally then handed me a tiny microphone and recorder. She said, "I want you to carry this with you all the time and keep it recording. Hide the microphone in your hair and put the recorder in your car. The transmitter works up to about half a mile. If you're out of range, the microphone can record up to 6 hours of audio by itself. It will upload the recordings to your car's recorder when you're back in range. If you give me your keys, I'll have someone install the recorder in your car while we finish up here," she continued. "I also suggest either rehiring your PI or letting me find a new one to keep an eye on your wife and Mr. Douglas. I've heard that Mrs. Malone isn't the first wife he's seduced, and he has tried illegal methods to cover it up before. If we can get recordings of his plans and offers this time, we might really be able to hurt him and your wife." I smiled and said, "The PI made the same suggestion. I still have him on retainer." The next Thursday morning, Sally called me and said, "Mr. Malone, we're ready to file the divorce papers and serve your wife. Do you still want to be there when she's served and make your comments?" I replied, "Yes, I'd like to be there. I've been thinking about the service too. Do you think it would be a good idea to serve her this Friday evening at the campaign headquarters?" Sally was silent for a moment and then said, "No, Stan, I think that would be a bad idea. If you serve her there and make your comments, all the campaign workers will either hear you or find out about your threats right away. It would be all over the news the next day, and Mr. Douglas would be cornered. He might lose the election, but wouldn't have any reason to threaten you or try to bribe you. I suggest we wait until she is either alone or with him only." "All right, I see what you're saying. Let's just follow them tomorrow night and see if they end up somewhere alone. Kristen usually gets home close to midnight on Fridays. And according to the PI report, they often spend time alone in a hotel room on Friday evenings, typically the same one they use for lunch. Maybe we can serve them while they're in the room and catch them in the act. Sally agreed to have the process server and me interrupt their meeting in the hotel room on Friday night. When I got to my office, two men in suits were waiting for me. They introduced themselves and said they wanted to talk about handling some funds for their widowed mother. I invited them into my office, and after closing the door, they showed me their FBI identification. They were investigating my interest in Jonathan based on the information my lawyer had sent them. The agents also asked if I would wear one of their recording devices while I was with the process server. I was concerned about how this might affect my plans to get some questionable money from Jonathan, my payoff, if you will. Despite my worries, I couldn't come up with a good reason to refuse, so I agreed to wear their wire. That evening, we followed the couple from the campaign headquarters to the hotel. They left the office at 7 p.m. and were in their room by 7:30. We had so many people following them, it felt like a convoy, and I was worried we might be spotted. Once they were settled, we waited almost an hour. I brought my camera to record this moment, even though I'm not usually into home movies. Just as we were about to knock on the door, luck was on our side. We saw the elevator open and a room service waiter rolled out a cart full of dishes. He approached their room and gave us a curious look. I smiled and waved him forward, saying, "Go ahead. We're not trying to interrupt Mr. Douglas's dinner. We'll come back in a moment." The waiter smiled back and said, "No problem," then knocked on the door. When someone inside asked who it was, he replied, "Room service." The door opened and the waiter entered the suite. The process server and I waited out of sight until he left. When he opened the door to go, I made sure it didn't close and then quietly walked into the room. We stayed near the door, hidden from Jonathan and Kristen, waiting until they started their meal before fully entering and seeing them. I led the way as we entered the suite. I was shocked and heartbroken by what I saw, even though I'd already seen the PI's report. Seeing it in person was much more disturbing than just seeing pictures. Kristen and Jonathan were completely naked, sitting at the table with their food spread out. They had appetizers, desserts, and a bottle of wine. Kristen was sitting on Jonathan's lap, facing away from him, with his Johnson inside her. As they fed each other and talked softly, Kristen moved her hips slowly, as if making love. She shifted her movements, sometimes rising almost completely off him before dropping back down quickly, or just moving her hips back and forth for a few strokes. They both looked like they were in ecstasy. Kristen would occasionally turn her head to kiss Jonathan lovingly. I started recording as we came around the corner. I gave a signal to the server, who then walked into the room and said, "Are you Jonathan Douglas and Kristen Malone?" Kristen screamed, jumped off Jonathan's lap, and ran to the bed, wrapping herself in a hotel robe that was there. Jonathan swore and stood up angrily. He snapped, "Yes, we are! And you better get out of my room right now. How did you even get in here?" "Well, sir, your room service waiter let us in when he left. Didn't you hear us ask if we could come in? I thought you had invited us," the process server replied as he walked further into the room and handed Kristen her divorce papers. "You've been served." I walked further into the room, and Kristen finally noticed me. She said, "Stan, damn you. What are you doing here? And why is there a divorce? If you don't stop this, I'll ruin you. You'll end up with nothing, and I'll take everything." I replied, "Kristen, you're not going to do any of that. If you're smart, you'll just sign the papers and accept the settlement I'm offering. Once I'm done with you, I'm going after Jonathan. I'm filing a lawsuit against him and his campaign for emotional distress and interfering in our marriage. Luckily, we live in a state where such lawsuits are still allowed. This might even impact the election as a bonus. To put it bluntly, you're screwed, and now you're going to get a lot worse." Kristen didn't come home that evening. In fact, I didn't hear from her until the next Wednesday when she called me at work. She didn't apologize or make small talk. She immediately said, "Jonathan and I want to meet with you about this situation. We've booked a meeting room at the DoubleTree Hotel for tonight. We want to resolve this quickly and move on. We expect you to be there at 7. I wasn't given any choice or consideration. I was just told to attend. I informed Sally and then contacted the FBI. Sally and the FBI both advised me to attend the meeting. Sally said she would accompany me, and the FBI assured me they would have agents nearby in case things got out of hand. When I arrived at the hotel, I asked for the meeting room. The desk clerk directed me down the hall to a small meeting room. As I approached, a large man was guarding the door. He stopped me from entering. "There's a private meeting in that room, sir." I said, "I'm Stan Malone, and I'm supposed to be in there." After checking my ID, the man knocked on the door. It opened slightly, and he said, "Mr. Malone is here." I didn't hear the response, but the door closed. The man then said, "I need to search you, sir. Please place your pockets in this tray." After emptying my pockets, I was patted down. I got frustrated and asked why I was being searched. The man smirked and replied, "Well, sir, people sometimes try to harm political figures, and Mr. Douglas doesn't want to take any chances." I strongly suspected they were searching for a recorder or wire, but I didn't say anything. My long hair hid the small transmitters I had stuck to my scalp with glue. After the search, it took nearly 5 minutes before they finally opened the door and let me into the meeting room. When I entered, I saw Kristen sitting at a table looking at me. She seemed very guilty, with a flushed face and chest. She had the unmistakable look of someone who had just had closeness. The sight of her made me even angrier, knowing what she had probably been doing. As Kristen sat down, I noticed she wasn't wearing any underwear, and there was a white substance leaking from her. I glanced at Jonathan and nearly lost my temper. He had a smug look on his face, clearly pleased with himself for having just slept with my wife. He was staring at Kristen and knew I had seen the signs of their recent activities. The meeting went pretty much as Sally and I had expected. Jonathan first threatened to have me fired from my job and then to physically harm me if I didn't offer Kristen a better settlement and drop my plans to sue him and his campaign. I leaned back in my chair and said, "Listen, Jonathan, I know you and your associates might be able to hurt me or even off me, but that won't save you. I've prepared several packages that will be sent out if anything happens to me or my family. Even if I get hurt in an accident, those packages will be mailed. You know you can't control every media outlet in this country. Some of the information will get published, especially if I'm seriously injured or dead. You're going down." I saw Jonathan's face flush with anger and noticed Kristen's tight expression, which I knew meant she was furious. I smiled and continued, "I know what you did just before I walked in, and I have pictures of you doing it several other times. I also have pictures and recordings of your meeting last week at the DoubleTree with union members and city officials. Do you think they'll appreciate being dragged down with you? If anything happens to me, the documents that will be mailed will include information about you, my wife, and those involved. We both know many of them are linked to dangerous individuals." Kristen was glaring at me, and Jonathan seemed a bit pale. He tried to act tough and said, "You heard me. Drop your threats and handle this quietly, or else. Now get out of here. I've said my piece." I smiled and got up. I stared Jonathan in the eyes until he started to look nervous. It was clear he was struggling to keep his gaze on me. I laughed, turned, and walked toward the door. As I opened it, I paused and said, "You know, Jonathan, I might reconsider if I was guaranteed a very fair divorce settlement from my wife. If the people in this city decide to elect you, they'll get what they deserve." When I got home, my private investigator and an FBI agent were waiting for me. They both took back their microphones. My PI said, "We got the whole conversation, including what Jonathan discussed with your wife and his friends after you left. He even had someone tail you, trying to find anything bad about you. He's really worried." After 3 days, I made sure the person tailing me was close by when I called my lawyer. We talked about the divorce, and then I said, "Sally, I'm fed up waiting for that jerk. I told him and Kristen what it would take for me to walk away, and they're both ignoring me. Get the papers ready and file the lawsuit against Jonathan. Let's ask for $10 million. That should grab his attention and make headlines." I chuckled when I saw the goon following me, pulling out his phone and excitedly talking. I drove straight home, and before I even finished dinner, Jonathan called. He didn't admit his guy overheard me telling Sally to file the lawsuit. Instead, he said, "Listen, jerk, Kristen and I talked, and we're willing to give you part of what you asked for. She'll sign the divorce papers without any changes and leave with just her personal belongings and her retirement savings. I'm offering you a settlement if you promise to keep this quiet." "Well, jerk, I can promise that I won't be the one to leak anything, but I can't guarantee that someone else won't let the information slip. There are probably a lot of people who now know you've been sleeping with my wife. All right, here's the offer. You sign a confidentiality agreement, and I'll deposit $1 million into your account with no questions asked. Kristen will submit the divorce papers with the settlement you suggested." I laughed and said, $1 million is nothing. I just told my lawyer to file for $10 million in damages. I know I probably won't get that much, but you'll need to offer a lot more than $1 million for me to drop the lawsuit. I could even make more than $1 million from selling the story as a book or movie." Okay. I can raise the offer a bit, but not by much. How about $1.7 million? I think I can manage that without too much fuss. I'll find a way to make it look like it was spent on the campaign. That's my final offer, though. Fine, but we need to move quickly. I won't tell my lawyer to stop the lawsuit until the money is in my bank account. Here are the details of a secret account in the Cayman Islands. I didn't mention that I had set up the account in his name using his address. I hoped federal investigators would find it and trace the money from his campaign to the bank. Of course, I planned to move the money out as soon as it arrived so it couldn't be recovered. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. When I answered it, I saw the same guy who had been guarding the door during my meeting with Jonathan and Kristen. He handed me a clipboard with a single-page legal document on it and said, "Mr. Douglas sent this for you to sign." I read the document and then looked at him. I said, "It looks fine, but I need to discuss it with my attorney before I sign." "Well, I'm not supposed to leave without the signed document." I sighed and closed the door in his face. I went to my office and called Sally. After I explained the situation, she agreed to come over and review the document. It took her almost an hour to arrive, but once she read it, she smiled and told me to sign it. 3 days later, I checked the Cayman account and saw it had $1,700,000. That same day, my attorney called to let me know Kristen had signed and returned the divorce papers, which had been filed. Since the divorce was uncontested, it would be finalized in 30 days. I had already moved the money from the Cayman account to avoid any attempt by Jonathan to recover it. I transferred it around the world twice and then put it in a different account at another Cayman bank under a new fake name. Even though I kept working during this tough time, my performance suffered. My commissions were about half of what they usually were, and it wasn't all because of the bad economy. Often, one of my coworkers had to cover for me, so they ended up getting the commission on sales and purchases that my clients made. After the divorce was finalized, I still couldn't focus properly. I made more mistakes at work, which cost me. If I messed up a transaction for a client, I had to fix it. I was tired of always being on edge, worrying about potential accidents. I feared that Jonathan and his associates might try to retaliate for what I had done to him, especially when the federal investigators eventually cracked down on everyone involved. One night, while I was at home feeling like my life had fallen apart, the doorbell rang. It was after 9 p.m. When I opened the door, I saw Kristen standing there. She was crying, and there was a big red mark on her face that looked like it would turn into a serious bruise. She looked at me, then down at the floor and said, "Stan, please, can I talk to you?" I almost told her to leave and shut the door, but then I decided to find out why she wanted to speak with me. I stepped aside and let her in. Without saying a word, I led her to the den and took my chair. I kept the surveillance cameras running, wanting to have the conversation in a place where the picture quality would be better. I made sure she sat on the couch so the cameras would capture her clearly. Kristen sat down and stared at me, crying silently. Eventually, she said, "Stan, I know it's too late, but She took a deep breath and continued. "I want to apologize for what I did to us. I should have known better, but somehow that guy got past my defenses. You know how much I like to flirt and how driven I am to succeed. Somehow, he knew exactly how to push my buttons, and I fell deeply in love with him. It felt like he was perfectly in sync with me, and I just couldn't say no. I was so caught up in the job he promised me after the election if I helped him that I lost sight of our relationship." Kristen was now crying loudly. She looked at me and said, "Remember how angry I got on New Year's Eve when you tried to stop us? Oh, Stan, you were already too late the last time you pulled me away from Jonathan. We had just come back into the room from one of Terry's bedrooms. That guy convinced me to sleep with him less than 3 hours after I met him. I'm so sorry. It only took 3 weeks of sneaking around behind your back before I was sure I needed to fully commit to him. He promised he would divorce his wife and marry me after the election. He said he couldn't file for divorce beforehand because it might cost him the election. I was excited about the idea of being married to the mayor and maybe later becoming a senator or governor. After the trouble you caused, I felt like Jonathan was starting to pull away from me. Tonight at the office, I caught him in the stockroom with one of the young college volunteers. You were right as usual, Stan. He was telling her the same things he told me. He promised to leave his wife and marry her after the election. When I confronted them, he laughed at me. He asked me why I thought he would ever marry someone like me, an old, used-up woman with a history of cheating and gangbangs. He said if I was nice to him, he'd keep me around as his social secretary, and I could still live the good life. He said I could entertain some of his important contributors like I had before. His new girlfriend laughed at me, and I slapped him. Then he hit me. Kristen, I know it's too late for us, but I wanted to tell you that I've finally realized what I did wrong and to apologize for how I hurt you and us. If you could find it in your heart to forgive me, I would love to try to get back together. I knew you were a great guy, but there was something about Jonathan that I couldn't resist. I got so caught up in the idea of living a glamorous life with him that I completely lost my sense of what was right. Kristen looked at me for a moment longer. I watched as tears silently streamed down her face. Finally, she gave me a hesitant smile, stood up, and walked over to my chair. She leaned in and gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek, then hurried out of the room and left the house. I was stunned for a moment before I walked to the door and saw her car drive away. I sighed and thought about how I wished she had come to her senses before getting involved with Jonathan and his supporters. I turned around and went back into the den. A few days later, I couldn't stand it any longer. I needed to escape all the memories and pain. I put my house up for sale and hired a real estate agent to help me find a new place without those memories. I hired a team to pack up my furniture for storage, another team to clean the house, and yet another team to take care of the yard. Every now and then, I would check in with Terry or Sally. They said the FBI was in charge of the investigation to avoid any issues with potentially corrupt local police. There was an agreement to keep my involvement confidential and not use the information Sally provided unless absolutely necessary. Sally mentioned that the FBI found enough evidence of corruption to uphold that agreement. Nearly 6 weeks after deciding to sell my house, I woke up to breaking news across all the national channels. The FBI had arrested everyone involved in Jonathan's misuse of Kristen. They faced numerous charges, including misuse of funds, corruption, abuse of office, campaign violations, and racketeering. Jonathan was charged with misusing campaign funds, accepting illegal donations, and selling positions in his future administration. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, Kristen was also arrested for some violations. I called Sally as soon as her office opened that morning to get more details. All she knew at that point was that there were leaks from sources other than me, so it seemed likely I would be in the clear regarding Jonathan and his payment. Of course, he couldn't recover the money, and if he sued me over the non-disclosure agreement, it was likely I would win because the FBI and news outlets credited 2 campaign workers for starting the investigation. I just hoped I wasn't suspected of tipping off the union guys. I didn't want any trouble from unsavory characters. I smiled to myself, thinking about how much effort I put into secretly placing incriminating notes and documents among the papers the workers were handling. I did this many times while pretending to look for Kristen. After my call with Sally, I leaned back in my chair and grinned. I had my revenge on Jonathan. I was free from a cheating 304 with only attorney fees as a cost, and I was $1.7 million richer thanks to Jonathan's generosity. Now I was free to find a decent woman to marry and start a family.